Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the show. Today, we're joined by my friend Brian Allain, who helped compile and edit essays for a book called How to Heal Our Divides. And the book contains essays by people like Brian McLaren, Butler Bass, Shane Claiborne, a bunch of people who've been on the show. So, Brian, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for dropping by.
Oh, thanks so much, Glenn. It's really a pleasure to speak with you.
Definitely. So before we get too far into the book, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and who are you and what do you do and how on earth did you get connected to all of these great people who are in this book?
Well, it's an amazing story, honestly. All the things I'm doing now are a second career for me. I spent most of my life in high tech.
Mm-hmm.
I have a master's degree in electrical engineering. I worked at Bell Laboratories many years ago.
Wow.
And then went back to school and got an MBA and did a bunch of, high tech startup businesses or, large company things. And several years ago, one of my classmates from business school said, "How would you like to come and work with me? I've got a couple of small companies I'd like you to help me run." And after I was there for a couple of years, he comes into my office one day and says, "I've got a project I'd like you to work on. It's for my father-in-law, Frederick Buechner." And for people who are not familiar with Frederick Buechner, he published 40 some books over a period of decades.
Mm-hmm.
One was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. One was nominated for the National Book Award. He's got like a dozen or so honorary degrees from all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Highly gifted, highly respected writer, but he didn't do virtually anything in the way of self-promotion or marketing his entire career. So his family asked me to launch the Frederick Buechner Center and bring him online, introduce him to a new generation of readers. So that's how I got involved in this whole—
Drag him into the century, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I mean, that's how I got involved in this whole spiritual publishing arena.
Yeah.
And 5.5 years ago, I turned 60 and said, okay, what do I want to do the rest of my life? And started writing for your life, basically to take what I learned and working for Mr. Buechner and help other spiritual writers. So Writing for Your Life does writing conferences, and we try to give away as much as we can in terms of articles and videos and guides and to help aspiring writers. After I started that, one of the things I kept hearing was that writers of color are really underrepresented in terms of the number of books get published.
Sure.
So I started another conference series called Publishing in Color, which is intended to foster relationships between writers of color and people from the spiritual publishing industry. So that's been going on since 2018. The third major project that I launched 2.5 years ago is called Compassionate Christianity. You can find that at compassionatechristianity.org. And that's intended to be an online focal point for progressive Christians. And then the fourth major thing that I launched is the book, How to Heal Our Divides. And I can talk to you more about how that came about, but those are the four main things that I do now. And I mean, quite frankly, I'm very grateful, very thankful that I've been able to do these things at this stage of my life.
Yeah, for sure. You have a lot of connections, but yeah, I am interested. Like, how did this book come about? Was it your idea? Was it kind of like a group idea? Like, how did you get in touch? Because you have like 30 some odd essays, I think, in here. Like, how did you get all these people together to work on this project?
Well, that's another kind of miracle. I mean, quite frankly, I didn't even, go looking to publish a book or anything like that.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, I started doing all kinds of video interviews with people, book launch interviews, because I knew that they couldn't go on book tours, all my author friends.
Yeah.
I also did another interview series called Reading Hope in Trying Times, basically people making recommendations of books to read during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I was doing some of that myself, reading a lot of books about anti-racism and religious divides, political divides, things like that. But one of the things I was a little bit frustrated with was that I was reading all these great books about here's the history behind this issue, or trying to convince you that it's an issue, or asking you to look inside yourself for your own biases, all really good things, but not much about what do we do about it. So between all those factors, I said to myself, well, after the election, the 2020 election, I want to do something about overcoming the polarization that has been so distinct, stronger than I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, well, let me do a video interview series with some of these people, these organizations that I'm finding out about that are actually doing something practical about healing different types of divides. So first it was just going to be a video interview series. And I said to myself, well, why don't I see if these folks would each write a chapter and put it into a book?
Yeah.
So I saw in the middle of November of last year, I started socializing the idea with a few different folks. And everything, oh yeah, it's a great idea. People like Brian McLaren would say, yeah, here's some suggestions of people that, organizations that I know of, that you could include in this.
Yeah.
By Christmas, I was oversubscribed. In other words, I had contacted a number of people about this idea and said, hey, would you like to write a chapter in this book? And I already had more than what I had anticipated
Right.
looking for.
Yeah.
So I was kind of targeting 25 to 30. And as you said, I ended up at 33.
Yeah.
So I just, I said, okay, well, I'm onto something here.
Yeah.
So I said, oh, I'm going to, not just a video series, not just a book. I'm going to turn this into a whole platform, meaning website, social media, emails, all that kind of thing. So, so that's what I started doing, at the end of last year.
Yeah, that's really good. And the book, like what divides are we really, for our listeners, like what divides are we addressing? Are we addressing spiritual, political, family divides, all of the above? Like who's the reader who this is geared towards?
Well, the types of divides, my priorities were things like racial divides, political divides, religious divides. I also included some on immigration, some on abilities, some on the LGBT divide, because I thought those were all important as well.
Yeah.
But the main purpose of the book is not to convince anybody that these divides exist. This is assuming people already understand.
We're aware.
but want to do something about it.
Yeah.
So the intent is to give folks a whole bunch of different choices of how they can get involved in all kinds of different organizations, all kinds of different ways.
Yeah.
Or use one of these as a role model to start something yourself.
That's right.
But, again, the whole idea is very practical, very pragmatic, actually doing something, not pontificating, not theorizing, but actually doing something to help our country.
And that's what I love about the book is that, there were so many things in there that are like springboards, like you said, for ideas, because like I was reading some things of like, oh, I never thought of that, or I've thought about this issue 1,000 times, but never thought about it from this perspective, and thinking about it from this person's perspective opens up so many other doors of possibility for what we can do to address this thing. So well done on the book, because honestly, like when I read it, I didn't feel like it was a how-to guide. I felt like it was more of a you can do this kind of guide, and really just kind of a tool in my hand.
Yeah, well, thank you. Anytime you're trying to title a book or brand a business, it's always a challenge, right? I mean, I wanted to make it real clear that it was a very practical, kind of thing. But you're right; it's not meant to be prescriptive.
Yeah.
Here's the step-by-step, ways that we're going to heal racial divides or something like that. I mean, that's just not, practical.
Right. 3 easy steps. Right.
Yeah, right. If I had that answer, then I'd make sure I tell everyone about it. But it's more, these are all very difficult and tractable kinds of problems that we just have to chip away at, one person at a time, one conversation at a time. And I don't know how else to do that other than, some of these organizations are actually having training programs or political forums or church suppers or, whatever to facilitate people talking to each other in a civil manner and helping to understand each other.
Yeah. And two, I mean, for our listeners, like a lot of people have approached me, especially now we're recording this during holiday time, it's going to drop after that. But like a lot of people have approached me and said like, like my Uncle Joe is coming over for dinner, for Thanksgiving or Christmas. And, he's got these beliefs and, my parents are really argumentative about, their love for Trump or, being Republican, whatever. Like, how do I address these kind of things? And up till now, I've been like, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Like, it's really hard. But this book, not only does it give you like practical ideas about how to actually heal the divides like in the world, but really how to heal those divides at the family dinner table. Because there's just a lot of things like that you can bring up in a discussion that I, as the reader, haven't thought of, but I can guarantee that my Uncle Joe hasn't thought of either. And so like, if you can bring these things into the conversation in a non-argumentative way, you can hopefully find some common ground, which is a big theme in the book that I'll mention later that really impacted me. But you can find some common ground with that person across the table that disagrees with you and have something in the conversation to kind of move you forward. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you found that. We these types of things affect different people different ways, right?
Yes. Yes.
But just as an example, one of the organizations that is highlighted in the book is called 3 Practices. and they have these meetings called free practice circles, where people from opposing viewpoints on some issue are brought together. And because of being highlighted in this book, they've had several people approach them and say, hey, I found out about your organization through How to Heal Our Divides. I'd like to be a facilitator of one of your practice circles. And so that's exactly the kind of thing I was hoping would happen, would be that people would come randomly out of nowhere, so to speak, and find out about some of these different organizations and ask to get involved.
Yeah, that's so good. So what I want to do is I want to do what I'm going to call like an essay swap with you. So I was wondering if you could share with me what is there's 33 essays in here, but like what is your favorite one and why? Maybe we can kind of dialogue around that. Then I'll share mine with you. We can maybe dialogue around that a little bit. Does that sound good?
Well, I mean, you realize this is like asking someone to pick their favorite child.
I know. I'm actually doing a thing right now while we're recording this called Instant Replay, where I'm doing my top 20 episodes from the last 3 years. And I thought it was going to be easy, but now I'm getting to the end. I'm like at number 17. I'm like, I still have 20 that I'd like to put in there. I don't know what to do. So I understand. But what's your favorite to kick it off for us?
Yeah, so having said that, yes, I mean, I will allow you to pin me down. Let me put it that way. I don't always do that. So I really honestly mean this, in that I love all the contributions from all of these people.
Sure.
I mean, I was so pleased with all of them. So I don't want to, diminish that in any way. But probably the one that meant the most at the end of the day to the success of the book was the one that Brian McLaren wrote. For a couple of different reasons. One is that, he's a well-known person. So, him and several of the other folks being affiliated with the book, it means a lot. Yeah. Secondly, is that he wrote a great introduction to set the stage for the rest of the book. And third, as I mentioned earlier, he introduced me to several of the people that ended up writing chapters in this book. So just from a pragmatic standpoint, I mean, his contribution meant a huge amount to making this happen.
Yeah. And what about what's one idea in there that he wrote that really jumped out at you?
Well, I mean, again, this is kind of an umbrella book, right?
Sure, sure.
It's recognizing that we've got a lot of different serious issues.
Yep.
And, Brian has always struck me as a peacemaker, right? I mean, he is trying to do the right thing, so to speak, whether it's religiously or politically or individually. So, I kind of honestly think try to emulate some of that. In everything that I try to do, even though, my personal characteristics, my personality might, cause me to be a little bit more caustic or less patient or whatever, in some of these kinds of situations. He's a good role model for me to help, bring me back and say, okay, that wouldn't be helpful, Brian, if you say that, Brian Allain, speaking to myself,
you not him, right?
Yeah. So that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and Brian is somebody who, to your point, he's a peacemaker. And I remember, I can't remember right now if I read it in this book or I read it in one of his other books, or maybe he said it to me, but we're talking about this idea of there being divides and talking about this idea of feeling like you're on opposite sides and, having a disagreement. And he said, like, one of the best ways that you can disarm a conversation that feels like it's getting out of control is when you feel that nudge that you want to jump at the other person and prove them wrong. You can kind of take a step back and say, like, I never thought of it that way. Would you mind explaining to me some more as to why you're so passionate about that idea? And I'm like, what a novel idea that is, because it's hard, because inside, you might be in a conversation that's kind of heated and your heart's racing and your ideas are gathering and you want to jump at this person. You want to jump across the divide and you want to grab them and you want to show them the way. But just to say, recognize the humanity in them, that they're passionate about something, and to ask them if they could help you understand where their passion is coming from. He said often that will kind of bring the temperature of the conversation down and will help maybe guide that conversation in a different way.
And I think that's incredibly wise advice. I mean, if people do feel like they're being listened to, even if they're being disagreed with, I mean, that tends to make a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, we all have, human needs. And I think one of those needs is we want to be heard. And so I think that sometimes when we do become so passionate about something, it's often because we want to be heard. Maybe we haven't felt heard in our past. Maybe we haven't felt heard in our lives. And so we, take the instance in front of us, this conversation that we're having, we use this as our instance to be, I'm going to be heard. But if we can recognize that need, I think to your point, it helps break down some walls. But for me, I really like the essay by Mark. How do I say his name? Mark Feldmeyer. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Yes. He wrote an essay called "Preaching the Common Good," and I liked it because I felt like he was talking about some things in the essay that a lot of people are not really talking about. And like one of the things that he said two things that struck me. The first one is that you can't heal your divides unless you can actually name what the divide is. Like, what is the issue? What is pinpoint the issue as to what exactly it is that's dividing us. Then also kind of like discover the common ground that we have, and can we work together on moving forward based upon that common ground? Because he really kind of made this argument that, we might be divided, you and me might be divided on an issue, and we know what the division is. We can probably name that, but can we look at the flip side and try to figure out where is it that Brian and I have common ground? And then can we move forward from that common ground to address the division that's in front of us? I thought that was so novel because like nobody thinks about that. Like you go back to the holiday table, like your Uncle Joe's across from you. Like all I can think about is all the things that he believes that I don't believe. But what can we do to find the common ground? And I think that alone can disarm so much, because if we can talk about what we agree on, then it makes it a little bit easier to trust one another to talk about things that we disagree on. So I thought that was a really great idea from there. And the second thing that he said was that like research, talked about like research and like studies that have shown that like the vast amount of Americans are not as divided as the media makes it sound like we are. And I was like, at first I'm like, I don't believe that. But then he backed it up with some different things. But just that thought that, if you watch the media, like you watch Fox News, NBC, whatever side it's on, they want you to think that there's these two sides and everybody's on one of these two sides and we're all at war with each other. But he brought up this idea that, we're not as divided as we think. We have more commonality than the media wants us to think. And if we can recognize that, we all have a foot on something in the game, and we're all sharing some kind of thought in common somewhere. If we can discover what that is, it makes it a lot easier to have these conversations. So I really appreciated that essay.
So I have to tell you the story of how that essay got into the book. It's the result of a book that Mark wrote that came out last year called A House Divided. And Mark is a pastor at a United Methodist Church in suburban Denver. And the book was a result of a sermon series he did along the same lines of what you read in that chapter in How to Heal Our Divides. He did a sermon series confronting all these different difficult issues. And for each one, he took the same approach that he talked about in that chapter, where he tried to find some common ground that basically anybody on either side or whatever of a given issue would agree with, and use that as a starting point for discussion. So, back to my earlier comment about I was reading so many different books and so many of them were not very practical. Mark's book was the most practical of any of the books that I had read, about various types of divides. So I said to myself, okay, well, I really need to talk to Mark to see if, he would be willing to write a chapter in this How to Heal Our Divides book, because he's doing exactly what I'm, advocating. Yeah,
that's really good. And I read that chapter probably 2 or 3 times because it was just, it goes the opposite of everything that, we're taught. Like I went to seminary for a bunch of years, and even in like our theology classes and things like that, like, especially if it gets into like apologetics, it's all about trying to analyze the other person's argument and figure out a way that you can dismantle it, to prove your point. And so really it's like wired into my brain. I know a lot of our listeners' brains that like the idea is you have to show the other person why they're wrong. And I think that doesn't take as much effort as it does to try to figure out where there's common ground. And I think, once you find that common ground, like you said, it's much easier to go forward. So I thought that was terrific. So next question is, what do you think, like, what's the big aha moment that you had in the book? Like, obviously you gathered all these things together. You don't want to necessarily pinpoint one over the other, but like, what idea did you take away from this book after editing it that you didn't really have before you got into the conception of the book? Like, before this book became a thing, what's an idea that you took away they didn't have before?
Well, probably the biggest thing was what I was mentioning happened when I was first soliciting chapters for this. In that, how quickly I found organizations that were doing something that I was looking for, that were healing some type of divide. So the fact that, both found the organizations and found the willingness to participate in this project, which was pretty quick. The rest of the story I didn't mention was that, we started, I didn't even talk to anybody until November about this. By December, end of December, we had already, kind of locked in who was going to be writing in chapters. And then the book was published in May. Right. So all those people, so those 33 people delivered their chapters. They got them edited. We got the book laid out and the cover design and everything else, and had a book available in May.
Yeah.
So it was an incredibly fast-paced effort. And, the fact that we obviously independently published ourselves was what allowed it to come out so quickly. But the fact that, there were all these organizations. So of course, after I identified the first, 33 or whatever, I started learning about more. So, back to, what we hear in the nightly news or whatever, we hear all the bad news. We don't even know about all these organizations that are doing all this good work. I hadn't heard of most of these organizations before I started investigating this.
Yeah.
Right. Like 3 Practices, Erebon, Telos, it goes on and on and on. And so, that was a big aha for me, was that there's all this stuff that's going on that we don't know about. And, we got to surface it. We've got to build awareness around and give people some hope too. That's the other part of it, is that, we're bombarded with all the bad news. I mean, let's put a spotlight on some of the good things that people are doing. I mean, to your point, the world isn't quite as bad as what it's portrayed to be, right? I mean, we tend to see things in very black and white shades instead of the gray that is the reality.
Yeah, it's really good. What are some of the, like, you already mentioned one of the kind of organizations that are in this book, but for our listeners who are maybe wondering, like, what kind of organizations are out there? Like, what's another one that comes to your mind from the book, like, that somebody's out there doing good in the world to kind of heal these divides?
Sure. So, there are a few different organizations that do racial reconciliation, racial awareness, racial justice. So Erebon, the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta, Roots of Justice. So if someone's interested in really diving more into racial justice, one of those organizations, would be really good. I mentioned Telos a moment ago. They do more what I would call experiential peacemaking trips. So basically, they go to either Israel and Palestine or somewhere in southern United States to kind of embed the group among warring factions, at least in the case of the Middle East, and try to help people understand, some of the peacemaking that's going on in those different arenas. So kind of like, anytime, I know in my own life in the past, if I'm drawn out of my normal routine, my normal environment, and plopped into some place that's different, it gives me more of an opportunity to learn. The whole experiential nature of this kind of stuff can't be overestimated.
Yeah, for sure. So if somebody picks up this book, if somebody picks up the book though, and they find like an organization like that, like they read about the organization, they're interested in it, can they reach out to that organization? And
absolutely.
Can they get involved? Yeah.
So within the book, at the end of each chapter, are website addresses, for each organization, so you can visit their website. On the How to Heal Our Divides website too, there's the list of all the organizations, each with a link that talks a little bit about them and points them to their website or their Facebook page or Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, that's really good. So what do we do then with all this material? So that's my kind of what I want to close with is, there's 33 essays and there's a ton of stuff in here. And I guess my question would be twofold. Is number one, what are you doing with this material, like in your personal life? Like, how are you applying it? But then secondly, like somebody picks up this book, they read all these things like I did. Like I read all this stuff. I have all these ideas. I have all these thoughts. Like, what do I do to take this information and to apply it to my life, to my immediate world in some sense, to the larger world in a larger sense? Like, what are your thoughts about taking things away from this book and actually applying it?
Well, so the first thing I would suggest is pick one and see if you can get involved. So it's like so many things are on Zoom now.
Yeah.
Right. So several of these organizations that had been doing a lot of in-person, sessions converted them all to Zoom. So you can do a three practice a circle on Zoom as an example. Many of the other organizations you can get involved, remotely where, that might have not been possible in the past. So that would be my number one suggestion is pick one that you're really interested in, you're really passionate about, you want to contribute to, and then go get involved. So that would be, my number one suggestion. For me, what I'm doing now is working on a second book. Because I mentioned before that, I learned about many other organizations that, were doing wonderful things that were not included in the first book. So I'm in the process of, creating a second book. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm hoping this is like an ongoing platform, not just one book, not just a flash in the pan. I want to try to extend the impact to build awareness about more organizations, that are doing really good things, get more people involved in them, and, figure out additional avenues that we can use to, help give hope, help give people an opportunity to try to make our country, make our society better.
Yeah, that's good. And I think for our listeners, that's a huge piece, because when I picked up the book, I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. Like I obviously saw a lot of names on the cover that I knew of. Brian McLaren's on there, Shane Claiborne, Diana Butler Bass. And so I was like, oh, they're going to write essays to give me thought-provoking things, about healing the divides. But, it's really like, I feel like we're not doing the book much justice if, like you said, we don't take away something and do something with it. And I think like you might not be able to do it at the level that these organizations are doing it, because they've been doing it for a long time. They have a lot of volunteers, but like you said, you can hop on a Zoom thing and you can take some of the ideas in the book and you can apply it to your small circle of friends, your small circle of a tribe, and you can start doing some of the stuff in your own world. And if more people do that, it's obviously going to have a much bigger impact. So I think the takeaway for me from this book was just take an idea and just do something with it.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. For people who are entrepreneurial, go start something new.
Yeah.
Use one of these as a role model and go, build your own nonprofit, or even, your own organization within your church, or whatever, the situation that you're in allows.
Yeah.
It's kind of surprising how we can find ourselves in unexpected situations where we actually can do something.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that, one of the platforms that I launched is called Publishing in Color, right? Because I kept hearing that there was this issue, of authors of color being underrepresented in terms of the number of books that get published, particularly within the spiritual / Christian arena. So I said to myself, well, I'm not a literary agent. I'm not a publishing house executive. I'm not an editor. I'm not even an author, really. But everywhere I've ever been in business, so much is dependent upon who you know.
Yeah.
Who knows you. And I said, well, I do know I put on conferences and I can foster relationships between people in the publishing industry and writers of color. And guess what? We've been doing this since 2018. We've got all kinds of new books that have come out, or magazine articles, or contributors to other books and things like that. And so that just started out of thin air.
Yeah.
there was nothing like that. I started asking around to say, hey, people, I've got this idea. Do you know anybody who's already doing something like this? Everybody said, no, that's a great idea. There's nothing like it exists. So, it's kind of surprising that in the whatever business, whatever industry, whatever environment, whatever group of people that you happen to be in, there's probably some opportunity that is sitting there waiting that, you hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
And maybe, the book will help you think of something that you wouldn't have otherwise, that you can just go start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that's a really good point. And I think it makes me think too, that like in our culture, even some of us, the way that we're brought up, we're just wired into us to think about the things that we can't do, to see what somebody else is doing. Well, I could never do that because I don't have this, or this, and especially in the world of social media where everything is glamorized, because all you see is the highlight reel of not just everybody's lives, but even like businesses. Like, you see these great organizations snapping these photos on Instagram of, helping all these people doing all these things. Like, that's just so amazing. I'm just a guy working a retail job doing whatever. Like, I could never do something like that. But I think that if you can flip the script, so to speak, and you can start thinking about, okay, we all know the things that we can't do, but what can I do with what I have now to start addressing this issue that for whatever reason, like I read in this book, and it sparked something inside of me. What can I do to address that thing? And like you said, it could lead to, look what you're doing. I mean, you're doing all these great, amazing things that started really from nothing. And here you are doing these things, and you got these books that are coming out, another one in the work. Like, this is all fantastic things that all started because you wondered what you could do.
Well, thank you. It's been a real blessing for me, honestly, to be able to do this kind of stuff at this stage of my life. I'm very thankful.
That's really good. Hey, we're just nearing the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you, first of all, will you come back? Because I'd like to do some more conversations with you, because I have some more things I'd like to talk to you about. But number two, and I'm also would like to pick your brain too about, I think for our listeners as well, just about writing and publishing, because I think that would make a really good conversation, because I'm working on a self-published book as well that's going to be coming out soon. But I have a lot of people who have approached me asking about different things about writing. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it out as I go. So I think somebody like you, we could have a really good conversation about that. But where can people go? What's the best place for people to go to discover a little bit more of your work online? Because I did a search on podcasts and a whole bunch of things came up for you on podcasts. So where's the best place for somebody to go to learn more about Brian?
Well, certainly for How to Heal Our Divides, the book and that whole effort, you can go to howtohealourdivides.com. So each one, each word just concatenated, howtohealourdivides.com. That has a listing of all the organizations that are featured in the books, all the people who contributed to the book, how you can order it. There's a discussion guide. We didn't even talk about the discussion guide. That's organized into 4, 6, or 8 week group discussions to go through the book. There's a free PDF of that available on the website, or if you want to order a print copy, you can do that as well. So the 3 other projects, Writing for Your Life is kind of the main focal point for the spiritual writer effort that I do. Publishing in Color is like a subset of that. So writingforyourlife.com is the one that's got all the resources for spiritual writers. Publishingincolor.com is the one that has the conferences for writers of color. And then finally, compassionatechristianity.org is a focal point for progressive Christians. And I will, give a shout out to a webinar series we're going to be doing in the second half of January that will be panelists. It'll be a sequence of 4 different webinars, each of which has got 3 panelists, where we're going to talk about, what are some of the big issues that, we should be paying attention to as progressive Christians. And, what are some books that you're reading, not that you wrote, but you're reading by other people that you would recommend. So things like that.
That's awesome. Well, I will compile those links together. I'll put them in the show notes, and I will share them far and wide. So thank you so much, Brian, for your time. And this has been a lot of fun.
Well, thanks so much, Glenn. Really appreciate speaking with you.
Thank you, sir.